A house that doesn't just haunt you, it takes you, and even when you think you've escaped, it never really lets go. Claire thought she had lost her husband forever, but when she found him trapped inside an impossible, nightmare-filled house, she risked everything to bring him back. Only something else came back with him. Now, strange whispers fill their home. Their daughter says, "That's not my daddy." And at night, something stands in their doorway, watching, waiting, because the house isn't gone, it's just waiting for them to come back. What happens when a house doesn't just haunt you, but remembers you? Watch till the end to uncover the chilling truth. And if you love terrifying stories like this, subscribe now and hit the bell icon, because the next nightmare is closer than you think. The Arrival. The Mercer family arrived at dusk, their car tires crunching against the gravel driveway. The old Victorian mansion stood at the end of the road, its tall frame silhouetted against the bleeding red sunset. A strange, unsettling beauty hung over it, like something that had been waiting, watching. David Mercer stepped out first, stretching his stiff limbs. He was a tall man in his late 30s, his dark hair already showing streaks of premature gray from the stress of the past few years. His wife, Claire, followed, tucking a stray blonde curl behind her ear as she glanced up at the towering house. A soft shiver ran down her spine. "Wow," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "It's massive." Their daughter, Sophie, hopped out of the back seat, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. At 10 years old, she was a bundle of energy and curiosity, but something about the house made her pause. She stayed close to her parents, her wide brown eyes scanning the porch. "Are we really gonna live here?" she asked, her voice unusually small. David chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Yup, our new home. Can you believe it? All this space for us." Claire forced a smile. "It just feels too good to be true." It was. The house had been an unbelievable deal, an estate this size for such a low price. When Claire first saw the listing, she assumed it was a mistake. But no. The realtor confirmed everything. The house had been on the market for decades. No one ever stayed for long, but Claire and David didn't ask why. Maybe they should have. The front door was already slightly ajar. David frowned, but brushed it off, pushing it open with a creak. Inside, the house was pristine. Not just clean, untouched. The wooden floors gleamed as if freshly polished. The furniture, though old, had no dust, no signs of wear. It was as if the house had been frozen in time, waiting for them. "Smells weird," Sophie mumbled, wrinkling her nose. Claire inhaled deeply. There was something in the air, faint, almost undetectable. Not musty, not rotten, but old, like the scent of forgotten places. David clapped his hands. "All right, let's get everything inside." Their voices echoed strangely in the vast emptiness. The sound felt swallowed, absorbed, as if the house were listening. By the time they finished unpacking, night had fallen. Claire stood at the kitchen sink, washing their few dishes. The water ran over her hands, ice cold despite the hot setting. She shivered, rubbing her arms. The house was silent now, the kind of silence that pressed in on your ears. Then, a creak. Claire froze, her breath hitching. It had come from the hallway behind her. Slowly, she turned. Nothing. Just darkness stretching down the corridor, leading to the staircase. She exhaled shakily, forcing herself to laugh. "Get a grip, Claire," she whispered. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing in that darkness, watching. Upstairs, Sophie sat on her bed, staring at the wallpaper. It was old-fashioned, intricate. Tiny golden filigree patterns swirled across deep green walls. It was pretty, in a strange way. But as she stared, something made her stomach twist. The patterns moved, only slightly. A flicker, a shift. She blinked hard, shaking her head. When she looked again, they were still. But the feeling lingered, like the house was breathing. Sophie pulled her stuffed bunny close. "I don't like it here," she whispered. The wallpaper didn't answer, but something inside the house did. A whisper. Software. Too faint to make out. Sophie clamped a hand over her mouth, squeezing her eyes shut. Maybe it had just been the wind. But she knew better. There was no wind inside the house, and she wasn't alone. The first sign, the first night in the house, was eerily silent. Not just the absence of noise, but something deeper, an unnatural stillness that settled over the Mercer family like a heavy fog. Claire lay in bed beside David, staring up at the ceiling, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. The air in the room felt thick, pressing against her skin like invisible hands. Every house had its sounds: creaking wood, pipes groaning, the occasional scratching of tree branches against windows. But this house? Nothing. Not a single sound. It was the kind of silence that made her own breathing feel intrusive, the kind that made her question whether she was truly alone. She turned onto her side, glancing at David. His chest rose and fell in steady, rhythmic motions. He was asleep, oblivious. Claire sighed, closing her eyes, willing herself to drift off. Then, a click. Her eyes snapped open. A door had just opened somewhere in the house. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she sat up, listening. Nothing. Maybe it had been Sophie getting up to use the bathroom. Yeah, that had to be it. But still a chill crept along her spine. She reached for the lamp on the nightstand, flicking it on. Warm yellow light filled the room, chasing away the shadows. Everything looked normal, but the feeling in her gut remained. Something wasn't right. Claire slid out of bed, careful not to wake David. She padded toward the bedroom door, pressing her ear against the wood. Silence. She hesitated, then twisted the knob, stepping into the hallway. The air was noticeably colder here. Her breath came out in a faint mist, visible in the dim glow of the nightlight plugged into the wall. She turned toward Sophie's room. The door was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness stretched from the opening, as if the shadows inside were leaking out. Claire swallowed hard. "Sophie," she whispered. No response. She pushed the door open. The room was empty. Her stomach dropped. The bed was neatly made, as if no one had ever slept in it. The stuffed bunny that Sophie never let go of was missing. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. This didn't make sense. She had tucked Sophie in herself, kissed her forehead, turned off the light. So where was she? Then, a soft thump from the closet. Claire's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she reached for the handle. Slowly, carefully, she pulled the door open. Darkness. Then, Sophie. Curled up in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly against her chest. Claire exhaled sharply, relief flooding through her. "Sophie, what are you doing in here?" The little girl didn't move, didn't even blink. Claire knelt, gently shaking her shoulder. "Sweetheart." Sophie's head turned, too slowly. Her eyes met Claire's, and Claire's breath caught. Sophie's pupils were too wide, almost swallowing the color of her irises. Her face was pale, lips slightly parted, like she had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Claire forced a smile, trying to mask her growing unease. "Come on, honey, let's get you back to bed." Sophie didn't respond. She just stared. Then, in the softest, most fragile whisper, she said, "I was in bed." Claire froze. The room suddenly felt wrong, like the walls were pressing inward, the air growing too still. A slow, creeping dread spread through her limbs. She forced herself to speak. "Sweetie, you must have been sleepwalking. Come on." She reached for Sophie's hand. Sophie flinched. Claire's stomach twisted. "Sophie." Sophie shook her head. "No," she whispered. I didn't get up. I didn't walk here. Claire's blood ran cold. Before she could respond, Sophie's voice dropped even lower, barely more than breath. Something carried me. The word sent a violent shiver down Claire's spine. She looked at her daughter's tiny arms, tiny legs, no signs of struggle, no scratches or bruises. But that didn't mean it wasn't true. Claire swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. You must have had a bad dream. Sophie shook her head again, her grip tightening on her bunny. It wasn't a dream, she murmured. Claire took a slow breath. Then what was it? Sophie's lips trembled. A long silence. Then, the house, she whispered. Claire stiffened. Sophie buried her face in the stuffed bunny. It doesn't want us here. The silence stretched. The air thickened. Claire forced a laugh, though it came out shaky. Sweetheart, houses don't... The nightlight flickered. The bulb shattered. Claire gasped, shielding Sophie instinctively as darkness swallowed the room. The air turned ice cold. The closet door slammed shut on its own. Claire grabbed Sophie, bolting for the bed. Her breath came in quick, uneven gasps. She clutched her daughter tightly, heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Listened. A long, suffocating silence followed. Then, from the closet, a slow, deliberate knock. Claire's grip on Sophie tightened. Her entire body went rigid. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. She wanted to run, wanted to grab David, pack their bags, and leave this house forever. But something held her in place. A presence, not seen, not heard, just felt. Then a whisper so soft she almost thought she imagined it. You forgot something. Claire's breath hitched. The darkness felt alive now, pressing against her skin. She reached blindly for the lamp, her fingers shaking as they fumbled for the switch. The moment the light flickered on, the air shifted. The room was normal again. Silent, still, as if nothing had happened. But Claire knew better. Something was in this house with them, and it was just getting started. The vanishing. The morning after Sophie's chilling revelation, Claire felt like she had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that closet door, heard the knock, felt the cold breath of something that wasn't supposed to be there. But when the sunlight streamed through the windows, it was easier to convince herself that it had been nothing, a bad dream, an overactive imagination. She had to believe that, because the alternative was too terrifying. Claire moved through the kitchen in a daze, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee. The rich, bitter scent did little to calm her nerves. David sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, oblivious. Slept like a rock last night, he muttered, taking a sip of his own coffee. How about you? Claire hesitated. She considered telling him everything. The open door, the way Sophie had curled into herself in the closet, the thing that had knocked from inside the darkness. But the words caught in her throat. David had always been the rational one, the logical one. If she told him, he'd just say what she wanted to believe, that it was nothing. So she forced a smile. Yeah, just first night jitters, I guess. David nodded, already moving on. Well, I have a meeting later, so I might be home late. Sophie trudged into the kitchen, still clutching her stuffed bunny. Claire frowned. Her daughter's usual energy was gone. Her little shoulders slumped, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Sophie, sweetheart, you okay? Sophie didn't answer. She just sat down at the table, staring at her untouched bowl of cereal. Claire's stomach twisted. Something was wrong with her, and Claire didn't know how to fix it. The morning passed in a blur. David left for work. Claire cleaned, trying to keep herself busy, but no matter how much she tried to distract herself, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. By afternoon, the house had settled into a thick, eerie quiet. Too quiet. Claire glanced at the clock. 1:47 p.m. She hadn't seen Sophie in at least an hour. A flicker of unease crawled up her spine. "Sophie?" she called, heading toward the staircase. No answer. A strange, creeping dread spread through her chest. "Sophie, honey, where are you?" Still nothing. Claire's pulse quickened. She hurried up the stairs, checking Sophie's room first. Empty. Her heart pounded harder. She checked the bathroom, the guest room, even David's office. Nothing. Cold sweat formed at the back of her neck. Her daughter was gone. Claire ran back downstairs, her breath coming in short gasps. She grabbed her phone ready to call David when a faint sound made her freeze. A giggle, software, echoing, coming from the basement. Claire's blood turned to ice. They hadn't even opened the basement door since moving in. Her hands shook as she approached it. The air around it felt colder, as if the wood itself was leaching the warmth from her skin. She reached for the handle, and the door swung open on its own. A sharp gasp caught in her throat. The basement stretched below, its darkness swallowing the dim light from the hallway. A single whisper floated up from the void. "Mommy?" Claire's knees nearly buckled. "Sophie?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, another giggle. But wrong. Too deep. Too distorted. Not Sophie. Claire's breath shuddered out of her lungs. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But she couldn't leave without Sophie. Slowly, she stepped onto the first stair. The wooden step groaned under her weight. The giggling stopped. She took another step, then another. Each movement felt like stepping into a mouth that was about to close. The darkness at the bottom of the stairs was alive, shifting, pressing against her skin like unseen hands. Then she saw her. Sophie stood in the center of the basement, her back to Claire, completely still. The air turned to ice. Claire's voice came out hoarse. "Sophie." Her daughter twitched. Not a normal movement. Too jerky, too unnatural. Like something inside her was trying to figure out how to move a body. Claire's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Deeply, terribly wrong. She took a shaky step forward. "Sophie, honey, let's go upstairs, okay?" Sophie's head snapped to the side, too fast, too sudden. A wet, cracking sound followed. Claire's breath caught. Sophie turned around slowly, and Claire's heart stopped. Her daughter's face was wrong. Her eyes were too dark, too empty. And her mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural smile. Not a child's smile. Something else's. Claire's hands shook violently. "Sophie," she whispered. Then the smile widened, and she spoke. But it wasn't Sophie's voice. It was a deep, echoing rasp. "She's not here anymore," Claire screamed. She stumbled backward, tripping over the last step, landing hard against the floor. Pain shot through her spine, but she didn't care, because the thing wearing Sophie's body was moving toward her. Not walking, gliding. The basement door slammed shut. Claire scrambled up, wrenching at the knob, but it wouldn't budge. Behind her, the thing whispered, "You forgot something." Cold fingers brushed her neck. Claire spun, her vision swimming with terror. The thing was gone. And Sophie stood in the middle of the room, blinking as if waking from a dream. "Mommy," she whimpered, eyes brimming with tears. Claire snatched her up, holding her so tightly Sophie let out a small squeak. She didn't care. She needed to feel her daughter's warmth, to know she was real. Claire threw open the door. Somehow it was unlocked now, and bolted up the stairs, slamming it behind her. She didn't stop running until they were in the living room, until the sun's golden light streamed through the windows. Sophie clung to her, sobbing. And Claire, she shook uncontrollably, because deep inside her she knew That thing in the basement. It hadn't left. It was still here, watching, waiting. And next time, it wouldn't give Sophie back. That comment was what did it for me. I started thinking about him as more of a threat than just a crazy drug addict. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. He asked me if I had ever picked up someone I shouldn't have. That question hit me like a brick. I let out this awkward laugh and said, "Well, I hope not." I was trying to keep it light, but he didn't react. He just leaned back and muttered something to himself that I couldn't hear. Then he started going on about how he used to be an Uber driver and how he quit because some punk stole stuff from his car. He was slurring his words a bit, so I couldn't make out everything he said, but I got the gist of the story. I looked in the mirror once or twice while he was talking, and that's when I realized he was smiling the whole time, which was incredibly unsettling. A normal person wouldn't smile talking about something like that. He concluded his story by saying, "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." Unfortunately, there wasn't much I could do about it. I felt my pulse speed up. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was spinning. I glanced at the GPS, focusing on the destination like it was some kind of lifeline. But the guy didn't know when to stop talking. He kept babbling about nonsense, some of it concerning, some of it just gibberish. I honestly couldn't keep up. Eventually, he started apologizing to someone, although I don't think it was me. He began insinuating that he had just done something awful and that he was a bad person. He kept saying, "I didn't mean it," over and over, followed by a few frantic, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond, worried that he'd do something if I did. I didn't know what he had done or what he was capable of, but I wasn't about to find out. We were only a few minutes from his stop when he suddenly snapped out of his muttering haze and yelled at me that I had missed the turn. I hadn't missed it. The GPS clearly showed we were on track. But I slammed on the brakes anyway, mostly out of fear. He demanded that I pull over. So that's what I did. My hands were shaking at that point. I just wanted the nightmare to be over. As soon as I shifted into park, headlights appeared behind us. It was a police car. I said a silent prayer and watched as it crept down the road, its spotlight briefly sweeping over my car. The guy in my back seat slouched down like he was trying to stay out of sight. I turned my head and saw him lying almost perfectly flat on my back seat with his eyes closed. I whipped my head back around before he saw me, trying to keep my breathing steady. He stayed in that position for a really uncomfortable amount of time. I wanted to ask him to leave, but decided against it. Eventually, he lifted his head and told me, "You got lucky." Before I had a chance to do anything, he opened my car door and disappeared. I ended up cutting my shift short after that. I was shaken up and didn't feel like driving around anymore. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. They reached Sophie's room. Claire threw the door open and stopped cold. Sophie was sitting on the bed, facing the closet. The door was wide open. Claire felt like she was going to be sick. David pushed past her. "Sophie?" Sophie turned. Her eyes were empty. Dark circles stained the skin beneath them. She looked thinner, drained, like something had been feeding off of her. "Sophie, honey, we need to go," Claire said carefully. Sophie didn't move. She just blinked, slowly, as if she was waking up from something. Then she looked at David and smiled. Claire's stomach dropped, because she had seen that smile before. On her own reflection, David didn't seem to notice. "Come on, kiddo," he said, reaching for her. Claire grabbed his wrist. "David, don't." He turned to her, confused. "Look at her," Claire whispered. "Really look." David hesitated. Then he did, and his face changed. His grip on Sophie's arm loosened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Because Sophie's smile was growing, her lips stretching too far, and her eyes, Her eyes were wrong, not Sophie's anymore. Something else stared at them from behind that small, innocent face, something hungry. And then she spoke, but not in Sophie's voice, in Claire's. "You forgot something." David yanked his hand away. Sophie twitched, her head jerked to the side in that same unnatural way she had in the basement. And then she laughed. Claire grabbed David's arm. "We're leaving," she whispered, her voice shaking. David didn't argue. Claire reached for Sophie, but something in her gut screamed not to touch her. Not like this. Not when it wasn't really her. She grabbed Sophie's stuffed bunny instead, pressing it into her daughter's hands. "Sophie," she whispered, "hold on to this, okay?" Sophie blinked. Then, slowly, she looked down at the bunny. Something shifted in her expression, like she was waking up. Her lips trembled. Then, her tiny fingers curled around the stuffed animal, and she whispered, "Mommy?" Claire's heart broke. She snatched Sophie up and ran. David followed. The moment they stepped into the hallway, the house reacted. The walls shuddered. A deep, low groan echoed through the house, like it was alive. Claire felt the air tighten around her, like fingers closing over her throat. "Don't leave!" The voice came from everywhere, from the walls, from the floors, from inside their own heads. David stumbled as they reached the stairs. Claire held Sophie tighter. Then the hallway stretched. The front door was getting farther away, like the house itself was warping around them, trying to trap them. Claire's breath hitched. Run. They ran, but the farther they moved, the longer the hallway became. A slow, terrible laughter rippled through the house, mocking, amused. "You can't leave," Claire screamed, and then something grabbed her ankle, a cold, clawed hand, and pulled. Claire hit the ground, her head smacking against the floor. Sophie shrieked. David lunged for them. Claire kicked wildly, her heart hammering, and then the front door burst open. Blinding, golden sunlight flooded the house. The moment the light touched the walls, the grip on Claire's ankle vanished. The hallway snapped back to normal. David dragged them through the door. They hit the grass outside. Claire gasped for breath, and the front door slammed shut behind them. The house fell silent, like it had never been alive at all. Claire lay there, panting. Sophie was sobbing into her chest. David was shaking. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Claire looked up, and the house was watching. The windows. They weren't just glass. They were eyes, and they were still smiling. Part 2, coming soon.